Hello and welcome to Beijing Capital International Airport. I'm currently flying in from Shanghai Hongqiao International Airport aboard a Boeing 787-9. Despite the flight being only around 2 hours long, China frequently uses large wide bodies, for example 777s as well as even 747s on these short, high-capacity routes. Beijing Capital International Airport is Air China's primary hub, just located slightly north of Beijing. The airline operates frequent flights out of here to many cities across China. Most of these wide-body planes flying these short routes would then later go on flying long-haul routes. Air China operates out of Terminal 3, the largest and newest terminal at Beijing Capital International Airport. Terminal 3 is split into 3 concourses, C, D, and E, with E being for international departures. As we taxi over to our gate at Concourse C, I spot this Comac C919-100ER landing next to us. To get between concourses within Terminal C, you must take this shuttle train, which I have to say is extremely slow. After going through immigration, I finally arrive in Concourse E. Here I spot Bravo 2006, a Boeing 777-300ER in a Love China livery. This is actually the first ever Air China plane I've ever been on. Being over 3 hours early, I am able to spot my plane landing after its flight from Shanghai. This, however, was actually not my first time seeing this plane on this trip. Upon takeoff from Shanghai, I actually spotted this plane right after it landed from another flight from Beijing. But anyways, here she is, Bravo 2487, the Boeing 747-8 Intercontinental that will take us on our trip to New York tonight. This is one of 7 Boeing 747-8Is in Air China's fleet, as well as one of 2, the other being Bravo 2485, that operate on this route to New York. Unfortunately, I'm not flying 2485, the one that I made for JOFS on this flight. Boarding began roughly 40 minutes prior to scheduled departure time. For some reason, I was selected for random security inspection after ticket check-in. Still, just look at that view outwards those GNX-2Bs. How often do you see 2 engines hanging off a wing these days? Here are the iconic stairs leading up to the upper-level business class cabin. The 8i has 2 extra windows on the port side specifically for the stairs. All seats came with a pillow and a blanket. Now for the seat review. Safety card and magazines. Another pocket with headphones inside. A cup holder. A standard bifold tray table. This was a bit stiff pulling out. Footrests, which I commonly don't see on planes. 2 headphone sockets as well as a USB-A port. Here's the view outside of the window. Standard armrests. And let's test recline. Average, I would say. A coat hook that could be pulled out to the right of the screen. Personal reading lights controlled through the screen. However, no personal air vents in this plane. There was also an international socket shared between 2 people under the seats. Now you're probably wondering, why would I ever want to sit in the middle seat, squished between 2 strangers? Well, I don't. As I booked last minute, more on that later, that was the only seat left as the flight was fully booked. Yes, a 747-8 fully booked. But still, there are a few benefits to the middle seat. Of course, I don't get a window view or a direct aisle access, and technically neither armrest is fully mounted plane. But as a solo traveler, who wants to both film out of a window and get to the bathroom without having to step over too many strangers, the middle seat is the best compromise. But still, it's not ideal. The best value economy seats on a plane for a solo traveler are these ones, all the way at the back of the plane. Anyways, back to the flight. Headphones were given to us before the flight. These didn't work out too well, so I just ended up using my own.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard the Air China flight. For your safety, please pay attention to the safety instructions of this flight.
I don't know if it's just me or not, but this felt like a very shallow climb out. Also, Air China, if you do ever need a proper 747-8i model, I have a free one on Sketchfab that you can use. Service started off with a drink of your own choice and no meal. I went for a hot tea here. This gave me time for the bathroom review. This was one of the two bathrooms at the very back of the 747. It was an average bathroom, though pretty old, I would say. It was still very well stocked up with soap, paper, and even lotion right here. However, some parts, such as the toilet and sink, were really starting to show its old age. For example, I had to press the flush at least 3 times before the thing actually finally flushed. But still overall a pretty average bathroom on a plane. Meal service finally came around with a fresh roll of bread and butter, a potato salad here, a fresh fruit cup, and a main dish which I chose the chicken over the beef. I had the beef on a previous flight, so I wanted to try something else. Kind of a mistake, as the chicken came in large chunks that had a weird texture to it. A second drink service came along using these strange cups. I went for apple juice this time. As this was an overnight flight, cabin lights dimmed shortly after meal service. Due to time zones, however, the sun had actually risen again, and it was very bright outside. As a result, the flight attendants told us to keep the window shades shut. The crew actively handed out water throughout the flight. Here's a 1-minute clip of me failing to use this very insensitive and trippy touchscreen. Oh come on, that was clearly moving forwards. This is what I mean when I say that this touchscreen is trippy as hell. Low-key kinda worse than the American one, not gonna lie. The lights have gone on, which means that another meal service is just about to begin. Once again, it started off with a drink, which I went with another hot tea. This one came with a cold bread roll with butter, a salad with dressing. For the main dish, I went with a questionable looking fried fish over the chicken noodles, and some even more questionable looking dessert. Once again, you see that there is an empty cup on the right for another drink service later on. The dessert tasted even more questionable than it looked. But anyways, my orange juice has arrived. And soon enough, we're beginning our descent just outside of Toronto. This is actually the second sunset we're seeing throughout this flight, the first one being right when we took off in Beijing. And here we are, pulling into JFK Terminal 1, next to this Korean Air Boeing 777-300ER. I'm gonna mute this clip right here since I'm talking to the flight attendants a lot, but after people started deboarding, I did get the flight attendants to take me on a tour of the upper deck. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to get a tour of the cockpit. And one quick look at first class, and welcome to New York. I actually caught a glimpse of Asiana Flight 224, an Airbus A380 that I was supposed to take from Incheon to JFK. However, one of my connecting flights got cancelled, so I had to reschedule to the 747. I wonder if seat 81D was still empty. But anyways, I was definitely starting to feel the fatigue. and will be feeling it for a few more days after that 15-hour flight. Normally this flight would only take around 13 hours, but due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, now all flights going to the US have to go around Russia, adding a few more hours onto the flight.
Stop. Look around and please take all your belongings.
We end our journey back where we started, at the American Airlines hangar here outside of Terminal 8. Now, how was that flight aboard a 747 in 2025? Well, compared to newer planes, such as the 787 and retrofitted 777s, the 747 was clearly showing some age, for example in its IFEs and bathroom. But still, how often is it you get to fly on the Queen of the Skies? Right now, there are only 3 747-8i operators, with the other 2 being Lufthansa and Korean Air. And for a while, this might be my last flight on one of them. It's quite unfortunate that many airlines are opting for smaller and more fuel-efficient planes. But as seen aboard today's completely full 747 flight, the passenger demand is still there for some flights. But to sum this entire flight up, here is the in-depth, critical rating of every aspect of this flight. Starting off with seat comfort, the seat in recline itself was average and decent, but the slightly extra legroom than what you normally find, as well as a footrest, that gets added as a bonus. Overall, a slightly above average economy class seat, earning a 4 out of 5 stars. Service was phenomenal on this flight. The crew was ready to assist from the moment you stepped aboard, to frequently roaming the aisles during the flight and offering water to anyone who needed it. Also, big shout out to the flight attendants that took me on that upper deck tour, greatly appreciated. Service gets a perfect 5 out of 5 stars. The food is where things get a bit rocky. Though not as bad as on some flights where I've straight up had undercooked food, this was clearly a huge disappointment, especially given the fact that catering was from the airline's hub in Beijing. Some of the food looked and tasted a bit questionable, and aside from that, I felt that these meals were missing a small side dish. For a 15-hour flight, I was also surprised that only 2 meals were given, no snack or anything mid-flight. The crew did pass out sandwiches, but that was only minutes after the second meal service ended, so I wasn't hungry at that time. Meal service gets an unimpressive 2.5 out of 5 stars. The IFE was equally, if not more disappointing than the food aboard. The movie selection was not great. Yes, I get it's a Chinese airline, and that I shouldn't be expecting that many Hollywood movies, but even the Chinese movie selection was not as big as I would expect and have seen more on other carriers. The flight map was also very outdated. I could not pan my view or zoom in and out of the map. It would also not auto-track the plane, so every time the plane would fly out of frame and I would have to restart the map to get it back in. IFE gets an even more depressing 2 out of 5 stars. For the punctuality of the flight, we landed technically ahead of schedule arrival time. However, by the time we reached the gate, we were around 10 minutes behind schedule. Not bad, but not great either, though as I wasn't really in a rush, I didn't care. Punctuality gets a 3 out of 5 stars. And finally, onto pricing. As I booked from Shanghai to New York, the cheapest option available was to fly Delta to either Detroit or Seattle, before transferring to either of the 3 New York airports. Though around $100 cheaper, this option required me going through immigration before catching a domestic flight, with around 2 hours of layover time. Though possible, I would rather go through immigration at my final destination, as the lines do get long sometimes. Being the next cheapest option from Delta, and the most convenient, pricing gets a 4 out of 5 stars. Also, it is cheaper to book through an external website. However, this does come with its downsides. In the case of Air China, I am unable to access my booking when I go to their website, and therefore unable to change my assigned seat. Previously, I had booked a flight on Asiana through their external website, and when one of my connecting flights via another airline was cancelled, I had to rebook this entire trip rather than just rebook that single leg, therefore booking the 747 trip last minute. This gives this flight an average of 3.4 out of 5 stars. And to throw it in there, that landing was a 3.5 out of 5 stars, only saved by the sheer number of wheels the 747 has. And just because I can, let's see if I can make a better landing than that. Yeah, whatever, goodbye.